what we want to do is be able to make that capability available to everybody. And again, everything's clickable so that at the right level, the superintendent or the principal or the teacher can drill down and see the data and information that's available to their students. So again, this just a little preview of what's happening right now, but I want to talk about some of the things that happened this summer, and really that was all driven by a lot of the work leading up to the data conference. And the data conference was really about this concept of data governance. With data governance, there's a lot of effort around trying to make sure that an organization like the Department of Education, and then broader, how the Department of Education works with schools and LEAs, as well as other legislative bodies, the public, and try to determine what are the things that we need to do better as an agency in order to serve all these diverse groups. And what it starts with are these 10 elements, and they're broken down into 3 different categories. There's processes, how we do things, why we do things; people, which are the folks that are actually doing the things and making the decisions; and then what technology and what data standards apply. What technology do we use, and how do we work with technology to make this happen? Because it's not about the technology, it's about how you use the technology. So first, I want to talk a little bit about processes. And this is something we talked a little bit about at the data conference. So for those of you who were there, you've heard some of these things, but I think it's important for everybody to kind of understand what applies with data governance. And the first thing is these processes. It's about the data that's used to drive decisions. And it's not about the data that goes into the system, it's about what data comes out of the system, how people use the data, so that we don't want to collect anything in our process that's not going to be used. So that's something important that we're going to talk a little bit about later as well. Policies are what drive what people do. And we need to make sure that we have policies so that everybody understands and everybody can work towards the same set of rules in collecting data, in protecting the data, in making sure that the data is matched among the different systems that we use. And also, we want to make sure that there is the right amount of oversight and measurement of what happens, because processes should not be stagnant. Processes should evolve over time based on the needs of the users and the people that are participating in things. We don't want to build something, push it out there, launch it, and then be done with it. We want to make sure that there's a way to evolve what we do, to keep learning, to keep interacting with people like yourselves on what's working and what's not working, so that it's not just a one-time conversation that we do and then we go away and 5 years or 10 years later, we start all over again. No, this is an ongoing discussion. The second point of this is to get people involved, and people need to be involved at all levels. We need top-level people, whether or not it's the executive level at any given organization, Superintendent Huppendahl at the ADE, or people and leaders in the legislature, or people that are the leaders in the school districts. We need everybody involved at the top to understand that this is a serious matter in terms of managing our data. We need people like yourselves who are the data stewards, the people that are actively working with the data, that know what the data is about, that know what the problems are in the data, that know what's good in the data, to be able to participate and say, this is what we are collecting, this is how we're using it, this is why we're doing that. We need feedback from the end users, because the end users are the ones that are, again, driving what we need. The end users are the educators. The educators need data in order to do a better job of, to look at what they're trying what the student performance is, to look at school performance, to determine what changes I need to make in my daily instruction or my weekly or my yearly planning. People need data, and the data, it comes from what we collect, comes from all these other processes that we talked about, comes from the data that's managed and used by all of us here. So getting the end users involved is extremely critical. But you also need somebody to coordinate this. So whether or not it's the Department of Education, whether or not it's at the individual school districts, we need somebody that's designated as this data governance coordinator to ensure that everybody is working together, that these problems are actually getting resolved, that there's a forum for talking about these matters and getting them taken care of. Again, the data governance coordinator isn't somebody that is going to make all the rules as a king or queen, but this person really is the one that is coordinating, getting everybody involved, taking the problems, and making sure they're out in the open for everybody to address. And the last of the three components is really the data and technology. There are data standards that need to be implemented. If we're not using the same standards, then it's going to be very difficult to move data around and make sure that there is not that repeated effort to ensure that the data that's delivered is exactly what I thought I was going to send to you. So getting the standards around data in education, we're using Common Education Data Standards, and we're also using EdFi. So these standards, we've talked about them before, and again, I'll talk a little bit about what our progress is in using these standards. The other thing is making sure that the tools that we have are good tools and are useful tools. And that means talking again to people, getting people's feedback on what tools they're using to do their job, whether or not the tools need to be changed, what enhancements that we're required to the tools. Because if the tools aren't effective, then we end up in that situation that we're in today, where there are at least, by our estimates, over 500,000 staff hours by people in the field, yourselves, your co-workers, your colleagues, every year trying to get data into the AD systems and verify that the data in our systems is correct. The last part of this, and this is becoming an ever more important issue for all of us here to address, is really dealing with privacy. The issue of privacy, especially when it comes to systems like this, where we have a lot of data that we're collecting, is really critical, because there's a lot of confusion out there about what is the privacy of the data that's collected at the state. And we need to have a consistent message about how we handle privacy. And I mean, at the state, the privacy hasn't really changed. We're not doing anything different than what we've done before. But we do need to make very clear to people what it is that we are doing. And I think that level of lack of clarity, I think, has been hurting us in the past, and we're going to take aggressive measures to make sure that our privacy policies and use policies are very clear. So the process that we go through, this sort of the checklist at the Department of Education, I'd encourage you to kind of think about this and how it applies to your LEAs as well, is we go through this checklist every time we have a problem. And we try to figure out how we address these things on the checklist when we solve the problem. And the first is ensuring that there's accountability. Who's responsible for this piece of data as it goes through the system? Somebody needs to be, you just can't say, well, that's my data. I was only responsible for getting it in, and it's not my problem anymore after that. The next part is ownership of data elements. We, at the Department of Education especially, we collect a lot of different things. And somebody who collects it should be responsible for ensuring that it's used properly by the Department of Education, by anybody who needs to use it. If we collect it, we need to make sure that it accurately reflects what it is that we told the people that we were going to collect, and that what we're reporting on. So somebody needs to own every single element in the system. And that doesn't mean that that person is the one that says, well, I want to change this element. No, there need to be processes for that. And these unambiguous processes and policies for changing data, for collecting new data, for eliminating data, again, that has to be very clear to everybody, that you just can't go out and start saying, I need a new data element because the other data element is just not exactly what I want. It's almost what I want, but it's not quite what I want, so I'm going to start a new collection, or I'm going to tack on this field to this other collection in order to get this information that I want, which is slightly different from what you've already sending me. And the last is making sure that we are clearly communicating to everybody that needs to send us data. What are these timetables? What are the processes that we're using? If we're going to change something, do you get adequate warning of what is it that we're going to change? Do you even know or participate in the process by which we change our data elements or add new collections? Again, this is something that we have to do a better job of in order to get everybody involved and total ownership and partnership in the whole process of data governance. So about the privacy thing. There's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about, and I know that we all treat the privacy and security of data, it is all very important and near and dear to our hearts. We're touching this data all the time, and we need to make sure that the parents that are out there, their students, the guardians, all that information is secure and taken care of, and that we're not doing anything with it that they don't want us to do with it. And it's not required by law. So first, I just want to kind of reiterate what our message is at the Department of Education. First is that we really have a goal of trying to reduce our data collections. Less is more. You know, I mean, yeah, it's all better if we collect less and are able to do what we need to do with less data. And we all want to make sure we collect it one time. We don't want to collect it multiple times from you. We only want to collect it one time and use it as often as it's required. And we are actively working to simplify that right now. We need to make sure and let everybody know clearly that anything that we collect is required by some state law, federal regulation, board policy. Again, everything has to have a reason behind it, and those reasons need to be published and made clear to everybody. Because, again, if you have to send us data, and the parent goes to you and says, why are you collecting this from me? You need to be able to tell them, well, the state requires this because of X, Y, Z. And we want to make that clear so that you can have that information. And there's a lot of other stuff going on in terms of what could be happening with all these types of data systems that are out there. And we have no intention to collect things that are completely not in line with what our mission is. And when people talk about things like, you know, oh, you're going to start collecting information on your parents' voting history, or, you know, like, oh, if there are guns in the household, you're going to collect all that information, and your eye color, and you're going to load that into database. No, we're not doing any of that. We don't need that. There is nobody's asked. There's, again, the people that use the data, nobody's asking for it. If there's no use for that, then there's no reason to collect it. We are working to simplify our list, and again, we are routinely updating that list on our website. And again, we are the updated list of what we're trying to collect. We're going to post that before the end of the year out on the website. And a couple of things about about what people are allowed to see and what data we share at the Department of Education. First, everything is protected by FERPA. And FERPA doesn't say what you have to share. It says what you're allowed to share. And we make sure that everything we do choose to share and choose to use is allowed within FERPA. That doesn't mean we choose to do everything and choose to share our data with everybody. That's not the case at all. The other thing is that we send a lot of data to the federal government. There are a lot of reports that we send back there. EdFacts collections are massive, massive amount of work for us. But everything is aggregate. We don't send any student level information. All student level data, personal identifiable information is kept in our system. None of that is requested by the federal government, and none of it voluntarily gets sent by us to the federal government. And in fact, the federal government has actually stated that sending them data that reveals personal identifiable information or student level data is actually against their own law. So they don't want it, we don't want to send it, we're happy. The last part, the next part is that we have employees and we have staff that work at the Department of Education. Just because somebody works at the Department of Education doesn't mean that they get to see everything. People see what they need to see to do their jobs. And just like we set up common logon access for people like yourself and your colleagues, we also have the same similar common logon permissions for people inside the agency. We're implementing a new system that's going to, over time, once it gets all the kinks get worked out, will be even more efficient in terms of handling things than the common logon system. But the point is that just because somebody's at the department doesn't mean they get to see everything. And I need to make that very clear to you so that you can communicate that to other people as well. And just to kind of touch on what does happen with research requests. We get lots of requests for research data. People want to study, want data so they can do research requests. These things come from institutions, there are research organizations, there are sometimes college students are interested, graduate students are interested in doing research. People are interested in trying to determine whether or not the programs that we've implemented in the state are effective. They want to know how money is being spent. These are all interesting questions. Some of them are better questions than others. And what we do at the department is we look at each of these questions. We determine, is there value to Arizona by having this question answered? If there is value to the people of Arizona, then what is the minimum amount of data that we can give to this organization, to this researcher, to meet their needs? And there are other things that we do as well. We kind of, again, in some cases, we know the research organization, so we trust them. In other cases, if we go, I don't know this person, then we go a little bit further and try to determine whether or not this is really worth our time, and we trust the security of sending the data to this person. So again, we take care to make sure that when we do engage in research with a partner, a researcher, that it is all as safe as possible. And there are cases where we actually deny research requests. And again, FERPA allows us to supply data. It doesn't require us to supply data, and we use that right judiciously. So about our data collections, again, over the summer, during the data conference, we talked about the kind of data collections we had. And we went through the entire Department of Education and asked all the program areas to report back to us on what data collections we had either published on the website, through Common Logon, the email blasts that go out a couple times per year. And we tried to just inventory that and put it all in one place as to, well, what time these things are, what's collected and what's not. We basically made a dent in that. And the first part of that dent is just understanding that we ask for nearly 300 pieces of, 300 discrete collections can happen. And some of these collections are multiple. So we talk about things like SACE is just one of the many collections that are on here, but it happens multiple times per year. So even though we may have nearly 300 collections, the amount of times you send us data could be actually far greater than that per year. So that's a lot. And we tried to we started to organize the collection, try to sort through how much of this data is redundant, and how much of through this whole process, we identified collections that we have on our website that are actually obsolete now. So we started to take those down. There's just a lot of stuff, and it's just, over time, things have grown because of the lack of data governance in the ADE. We allowed this to grow, and we're taking steps to really pull all that back down. So how are we doing that? We're going to follow the standards that we talked about. We're going to align everything that we collect and everything that we use to these standards, to Common Education Data Standards and Ed 5. Now, if anybody had ever looked at these standards, or you may have some people that come to you that say, well, Common Education Data, there are thousands of things in there, and you know, why do you need to collect all these thousands of things and report them to the state? Well, yes, there are thousands of things in there, but that doesn't mean we're going to use all of them. We're going to use only a fraction. Just like there's a lot of words in a dictionary, I'm not going to use every single word in a dictionary every time I have a speech. So it's true. So again, it's a tool by which the Department of Education can work with our schools to say, this is what we're going to collect. Here's a meaning of a last name. Here's the meaning of gender. Here are the allowed code sets that we're all going to agree on, and our vendors are going to agree on. And this is how we're going to use it inside the department. And once we have those agreements, then the whole movement of data in both directions can become streamlined. We're using the Ed5 model to start moving data back and forth. There are a number of different standards out there for moving data. CIF is one of the most well-known ones out there, but is one of the standards also undergoing extreme amount of change right now. And what we've decided, what we chose last year was to work with Michael and Susan Dell Foundation. We're using the Ed5 model that came out last year. And we're working with them right now to identify the collections that we have, which ones can map to Ed5, how we can consolidate multiple collections into a single collection, and streamline the data that we're getting from you all. So the process has been, first, identifying our collection points through the meeting with the program areas, reviewing the Common Logon applications, looking at all the forms and documents, working with the Data Governance Commission, the Arizona Data Governance Commission. There is this organization called the Data Governance Commission that has been enacted to oversee everything having to do with the ALIS data system, as well as provide guidance and guidelines for for technology standards and data standards from pre-K through post-secondary. And we're working with the data governance organization to look at how we're collecting data, and they are actually the authority for, it's enacted in the statute, that they are the authority that we have to get approval from if we want to collect anything new. So out of the nearly 300 data collection points that we talked about earlier, we streamlined it down to 210 that are actually legitimate, valid data collections. Then we took 35 of those that we felt like were the ones that would have the most commonality in terms of streamlining and aligning to the standards that we have. And we are actively going through these 35 data collections and identifying every single element that's in there, mapping those elements to the SES data model, and looking at how we can store this and transmit this using the ED5 standard. We have some work that's remaining, and we expect to finish this before the end of the calendar year, which is completing the validation, publishing the list of these data collection elements out to the website. There's still a little bit more conversion to do. And then once we get these elements streamlined and identified, we actually have to change our data collection processes. And again, some of that will happen throughout this year as well as in future years to start using the more streamlined data collections. Well, we have a goal. We want to cut down the number of collections we have to about 1/10 of what we have currently published. That's going to be pretty aggressive, but it will take some time, and we're going to track to see how close we're getting to that goal. It's going to require work from us to work with you and to work with your vendors to implement the changes in the systems that are required so that data is sent to us in a format that meets those standards, and to make sure that the collection that is sent, the data that's sent to us, actually meets the needs of the program areas and the educators that are going to be using that data. So again, that work is going to be ongoing, but again, look for these messages to come out to you for asking for your support in doing this. And inside the Department of Education, we have a lot of redundant data. We have our data duplicated throughout many systems, and it makes it really hard for us to actually do our work sometimes and actually pull the data and analyze it to make sure that we're getting the right thing from you and that we're asking for the right thing. We want to reduce that data set. We have a goal to reduce the amount of data that we have by 50% this year. It's quite an ambitious goal, but over time we want to be able to get that down to even greater, down to about 80%. Of course, during that whole time, we'll probably be generating new data at the same time, so it'll be kind of tricky, but we'll see how that goes. But again, we're measuring these things ourselves. So again, it's not a situation where we are just putting the number out there and we're never going to know what happened to it. We're actively measuring these things. So just a last couple of thoughts on the whole process of data governance and what the department's trying to do and how everybody can be involved in that. Well, first is that the whole process of data governance impacts everybody. I mean, from the student, the guardian, the parents, to people that are collecting the forms at the front office, to people that are entering the system, data in the system, transmitting it to the technologists that are transmitting and receiving the data, people that are developing the systems, people that are using the data. It's a beginning to end, and just a strand of sort of privacy information. Again, the department, everything we collect, we don't collect from parents. We collect that from you. And a lot of the data, you collect a lot of data that are used in things like PTO guides or directory information. The nurse's office gets a lot of data. This is all valuable data that you need to run your operations and ensure the safety of the students that are entrusted in your care. It's a huge responsibility. And we only need, at the state, a fraction of that data. And making sure that everybody understands that and making sure that everybody's clear on that is really critical. I think just a few weeks ago, there was some confusion on a piece of data that somebody would need to send to the department. One district thought that they had to send us all the student level data for a certain assessment. And it was like, no, you don't have to send us that. You just have to send, we just need a count. You just need to tell us the count. You don't send us the whole list, just tell us the count. And so it starts, those kinds of misunderstandings cause a lot of confusion because sometimes parents start to wonder because they hear one thing or hear another thing from their student, or they overhear something, or they get some misinformation from the internet, and next thing you know that we're all in trouble for doing something. And we need to make sure that we have our messages straight over how data collection impacts everybody, so that everybody can understand that we as a group are only collecting the data we need to do our jobs and ensure the safety of students. There's activity that needs to take place at all levels. There's something called the Data Quality Campaign Survey that takes place every single year. Every single state is surveyed on how well they are trending towards 10 actions in terms of using data and protecting data. And what Arizona was found lacking on for the past couple of years is really messaging out to non-educators. I think we've been doing a pretty decent job of starting our messaging to educators, people that work in education, people like yourselves, teachers, principals, administrators, in terms of what data we have, how to use data, how data collection works. That messaging is getting better. But what we've been doing a bad job of, especially at the state from the Department of Education point of view, is that we've been doing a poor job of communicating out to parents, to legislators, to the business community, what data we have, what our privacy policies are, how you can use data to make changes in your community, how you can use data to determine where to send your students, how you can use data to talk to your school or district administrators. We have been doing a bad job at that, and we need to do a better job of that. And you'll see us start to develop communications and messaging